Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Northshire Presents virtual event. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rachel Person. I'm the event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Saratoga Springs, New York. Here, as I am so often these days, with my good friend and colleague, David Wood, event manager for Northshire Bookstore in Manchester Center, Vermont. Before we get started, a note of thanks to all of you for your incredible loyalty and support to Northshire for the last couple of years. They haven't been totally easy, but we've made it through the hardest times thanks to your continued support, and all of us are deeply grateful for that. Throughout this event, if you have any questions at all, please type them into the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We will have time for questions at the end of the evening, so you can post your questions at any time and we will save them up and ask them for you a little bit later on. Thank you so much for being here. And David, why don't you introduce our guest tonight?
Thank you so much, Rachel, and sorry for the lighting. It's the sun's coming through the dappled trees. Well, good evening. It is my great pleasure to introduce Khentrul Lodrö T'hayé Rinpoche for his new book, The Power of Mind, a Tibetan monk's guide to finding freedom in every challenge. Rinpoche is a United States-based Tibetan monk and the director of Katog Choling, a Tibetan cultural center. He oversees meditation groups across North America, in Australia, and in South Africa. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, he traveled year-round teaching seminars and leading retreats, and he now holds online retreats for his students around the globe. He is also the abbot of a monastery in Tibet. Khentrul Rinpoche is one of the only monks in the world with 3 Khenpo degrees, the equivalent of about 3 PhDs in Buddhist philosophy. Many of his students have nicknamed him the Mind Training Khenpo for his passion for teaching mind training practices. The Power of Mind is Rinpoche's modern guide to lojong, which are ancient Buddhist techniques for transforming all circumstances, including pain, anxiety, and stress, into mental well-being that benefits us and the people around us. Tara Brach has called The Power of Mind a deep well of both timeless and practical wisdom that helps us uncover the relaxed awareness and freedom that is our very essence. While Sharon Salzberg has said that the book is a practical manual sharing 7 key points that form a complete training for anyone, regardless of their belief systems. Khentrul Rinpoche shares his deep understanding of these teachings so that the subject is most relevant for these times. He is joined today by the book's translator and editor, Paloma Lopez Landry. Please join me in welcoming to Northshire, Paloma Lopez Landry and Khentrul Lodrö T'hayé Rinpoche.
Thank you.
Oya, teni ta teran de terpson kan la gedni. Teran de mi kapso atu lojong kor de mi samjria ko lojong kor. Te keran tola ti tepte ngotut zena yang da ti ton dak zo kare yin ti kor la chong sam ze jio ore. Ti che tu keran to mapo chik teran te dinang la tawa tang nyan ba stanim she kala pebdu patela tuji che jewa yins.
So I just wish to begin by thanking Northshire Books for hosting us this evening. We're delighted to be here, and as I said, I'm particularly happy to be having this opportunity to speak about training the mind, which is the topic of my new book. And I also wish to welcome all of you who are participating this evening online. So.
Oh, yeah, teni tapshir tang ke ngazo sosul ke u semze na yang da, teni mernam ki semze na yang da. Gang tar kyang teni sem den gandin da wore se nan durjong tan ni top man yong ta go pota wore se. Teni yang zetur yore. Huez virna te ta wore se. Te vjentone Lampoche, tan nindurjong matopi, Lampoche tauris, Tezena Kirantu, Tezena, ta gopo tau, Lampoche gopo tau, Zena, Tani, Durjong matopi, Tetelig, Sem Natu, Sem the Tetau Chiris, or Dan Durjong, the Topson, Durjong Topsonane, Sem the Lis Romatane, Sem de la Hachanko, Teni Dekit Mapoche, Shunga Yore, Carte, Teni Sem the Mandurnana. Dekikang shonga yomar o tendi chiktambo dordupa tamchiwa yens.
So when we look at our mind, our ordinary mind, or we could say our human mind, when we have not learned about our mind and how to work with and train or tame our mind, then our mind is like a wild horse or a wild elephant. And we have very little capacity over our circumstances. But when we tame our mind, when we learn to work with and train the mind, then our mind is actually extremely sort of user-friendly. And we are able to gain a great amount of well-being and happiness just from our mind itself. Whereas when the mind remains unworked with, untamed, then it can give us an enormous amount of unhappiness. Also.
대니 땅아초 샘친 쓰인 나는 라나 소수 대화 만든 간 직장 요 말에 대니 둥을 동큰 서 직장 요 말에 옛나요 아주 연도 땅 러니까 신치록도 송니 양거도 송니 샘라 대화도 그 요나요 대화 뭐마 직급 쇼라 로토 그 메파 대위 탑라 죽토 그 메파리 딥셔는 아주 ngama woku lama chiko mara tezer mare master chi ngato long chiko re tela toma mingme devi chetur juk sambu kame devi chetur juk dornan jikten tamchet wang ren ni chigli chingyo devi shoksu juk se ya chiko long yore te namshin te mayin na yonda mamayin pi tondro yin na yonda 노르나 테니 샘친 탐에 바 요토 쪽 탐체때 다 대위 쇼라 탐체때 단듯다고 시니네 유크요레스 옛나요 테니 대왕 오마테 토크요르지나 자와니니 테니 토크요 마레세 냐
So whoever we are as living beings, since we have mind, then what we want, what we yearn for is wellness, is happiness. And yet, and there is no one who doesn't want to experience well-being. And there is no one who wants to experience suffering. But unfortunately, then not knowing how to create that happiness which we seek and to free ourselves from suffering, then what we want and what we do are often in opposition to each other. And so we're constantly hoping to experience happiness and well-being and so forth, but then what our actions, the things that we do and engage in, then are such that they do not produce the happiness which we seek. And so there's a famous saying in Tibet that goes, even the eyeless ants move towards happiness. Even the legless worms move towards happiness, as if the entire world were in a great competition for what? To find happiness. And so no matter who we are, no matter what our circumstances are, human beings, animals, all of life, all beings who have conscious mind, sentient beings, infinite in number, we all want to experience well-being, happiness. And everything that we do is for the pursuit of that, is trying to move towards pleasure and move away from pain. And yet, despite all of our actions being for this sole purpose, we have yet to attain our aim. We have yet to find that happiness that we seek. Awesome.
테니 김슨 가리리 제나나 디 김슨 데 소데 나주 랑샤다 도샤 gapa dripa zena yang dra langsha zena gewa tang yun tang ge cha tham che de dorsha tang gersha zena mergewa tang dungar ge cha tham che chong ge cha tham che de no na re de tham che de zo de nga chu shilo la don do nye ni she ke yo re 옛나양 때니 슈로 라떼니는 레식 대화 용용 잠에 마토고 대화 뭐마직 토야메 요말 gem슨 때 이제 딥셔나는 아주 샘기 노르탕의 희송하당 샘기 땅의 삼로 땅때 게르와땅이 디노룩도 하고 소나 샘기 돌아 상위 나직 아주 하고 고야지 요래제 딥셔나양 롱직 등이 정게인 데니 롤니 노르토 마키나 집시 샘라 데투메 로르토 키핑 키발라 갱은 쪽순차로 엉제롱지고래 다 대제나 가르제고래 제나는 아투 샘기 유르란 주피니 칸나 체스터 주흐도 데니 유르니츠 도피니 kaptela 체스터 도흐도 노르나 샘코나 파란 로비니 kaptan 철 용위니 kaptan 유르란 주피니 kap만주피니 kaptan 노르나 샘기 가르셰켄도 오 대초 마히니 좀 때는 샘 코랑 걸 산이제나라 샘기 놀탕 샘기 남직 때 마히나 샘나 가렙 시장에 샘 데모지 용아 요마 집시 샘나 데두메 세 가렙 시장에 가렙 나투 드나양 샘 코랑 거토 데모 오마지 용아 요마스 나투 쇼로라 때니 대화 총점 용고 요래 때또 대화 오마 말이 등아수 니김버 제모체요 나수 야르비 대화세야 때리 깽기 원그 슈로 그 유스팅기 원기 나토 티지 평소의 대화 잠식이지 더는 깽기 원그 가토에나 깽든 줄소나 람상 나투 되니 대화양 get죠 그래 나토라고 한다고 지자와니니 샘코랑 그 대화라고 하지 요마스 딥시나 되니 집시 샘나 데이트메스 대화 용용 요나양 데니테 어장왕 전에 람성 냠로와던 get로이랑지 춘이 잔치그레제
So then, when we ask the question, why is it that we are not finding what we are looking for? Why are we not getting what we seek, despite all of our best efforts and actions and so forth? And that has to do with the actions that we choose to engage in and the actions that we choose to refrain from. And so the actions that we want to engage in, if we want positive results, then those actions need also to be positive actions and the cultivation of our own positive qualities and insights. While those actions that we should begin to disengage in are harmful actions and negative actions, and the ones that create the causes for suffering and all kinds of problems. So for as long as we don't determine what actions truly produce the results which we seek, and we don't engage and disengage accordingly, then we will never be able to find what we're looking for. And so then furthermore, when we look at, well, how have we chosen to engage in actions and put our focus and so forth? If we look at our history of humanity and so forth, our time has been spent primarily on cultivating our outer circumstances, on developing the outer world and pursuing our happiness and well-being based on our external circumstances. But if we really consider what that is able to produce, it is only a very limited and even for many, a very small degree of happiness, of well-being. In fact, some would say that it isn't even genuine happiness. And so for as long as then our focus is entirely on the external circumstances and what we can get from them, then our pursuit of well-being, of happiness, and so forth is going to be extremely limited. And that's why we need to begin to turn towards our mind and look at how does our mind, the sort of experiencer of all of this, how does it function? How do our ways of thinking affect us? What do they do? And so forth. And so the key or secret is not about the external discoveries, but actually learning about our mind how it functions and changing our mind. And there's a great degree of understanding and knowledge to be gained in beginning to look there. That's sort of the secret key point. And so then there's a saying that basically, if we do not understand our mind, no matter what we do, there will be no time of complete happiness. And the next line, those who become skilled in understanding their mind are no longer subject to conditions, are able to find true and genuine happiness. And so the key, it begins by understanding the role that our mind plays in our experience and how we engage in objects and disengage in objects, and how our mind relates to our experiences and so forth. That's really the principal factor, is how our mind is functioning within the circumstances, what to do with our mind in any given circumstance. And for as long as we don't understand that, we don't understand how the mind functions, what its nature is, and its way of thinking, and how it affects and influences our entire experience, then we really don't have an opportunity to experience genuine mental well-being, happiness, which is a state of mind. No matter what we do, we won't be able to cultivate that. And so for as long as we don't work with our mind and deeply understand it, then our circumstances are entirely dictated by conditions. And whatever small amount of happiness we do get from and in relation to those external conditions is extremely limited. And in fact, it isn't true happiness, it's borrowed happiness. It's borrowed happiness because it is entirely dependent upon the external circumstance. And it's merely a short-term pleasure arising in relation to that condition. And the moment that that condition changes, then it's gone, and the happiness which we had is lost. And so we don't actually have any control over that happiness. We have no power over it whatsoever. It doesn't actually literally belong to our mind. And for as long as that is the case, for as long as then we are functioning in that way, no matter what we do, there won't be any time where we reach that goal of genuine and true, of complete happiness, the well-being that we are actually seeking and hoping for in all that we do. So?
Oh, Terry, teacher na tening carriers and yagi ni deputy monk de la semki nurtop blavo pate Terry. Ta semki nurtop zeta carrier kore zenane nurtop zeti carrier zenane latu tondrejig jubgonane. Then surgeon to team do with the dripped pin nubato, toku yopachilane, nurtobu zekure. Tifshana semki nurtobus and the lojong jipate, nanlacho semke, roll nortan, down the semki samno, tang. Then each can zampo chitang lapshona, semki samno, candid tango hodo. Can nambachi to lapshona, semki samno, carry tango hodo, zeni, lato mutsi chicken la. 대형 때니 뭐체 찍거나니까 자 ཉལ 로 누글라스 파탐치 쇼름 가두 있나요 디블로종 거 나가 탑 대초 테크닉 대초 할리반 킬데오당 큰드니경 리 하고 임바당 원든지 거 때니 탑름 짱짱 요래 니나라 딥션나 디블로종 대초라 셈티 누스톱 제키오레 gemsen 카레제나네 Then Cornatu Tondrich Dripna, the drip to be Nubayo Patella, that Nustop Zekor. The Congress in the Semki Nusto, which is on the tail, the Semki Nusto, Texo Shakore. Tifshana, when I had to Nustop GP Kablane, when I made a winner, Nustop de 젠기 무보 짝프럽시에빠 메이 누르톱다고 당네 대신도 데니 나초 무보 까리 인경네 다 코로나 소소라 누르톱만 보 회나가 두 칼라자야 당 둘로 고이야 되죠 있나 라나 소소 누르톱 요래 회나 갸캅지기나 누르톱 지요래 뭐 하나 소소 있나 누르톱 지요래 옛날 샘 코랑 그 토모만 비 누르톱 지 요바티 나초 돈다 강아지 접나네 니 pretender to be nursed to sem korang la yor yena nga chu to dukho yo ma nga chu kanger te o teni res
So this ties into then the title of the book, that is the power of mind. And so the power of the mind is speaking to the potential that the mind has, which is that it can actually accomplish our true aims. If we learn how to access the potential of our mind, we have this capacity within ourselves, this capacity to bring about that actual fruition, what we're truly wishing for. And that's what the mind training approach or genre of practices is about. It's about learning about our mind. How does it function? What are our ways of thinking, and how do those affect us, and how can we change and cultivate those? What can we cultivate then in response to positive conditions and in response to negative conditions? And essentially, then it's a series of pithy ways, of simple, direct ways of working with our mind throughout all the circumstances that we might encounter over the course of our life, throughout all of our activities, walking, eating, talking, moving around, whatever it is. Then it's a series of techniques then for cultivating a way of thinking and relating to our experience that brings us greater well-being and happiness. And it's something that is easy to do, and it's extremely simple and highly effective. And so the mind training is a body of teachings on techniques for learning about and then working with our mind to access its potential, which is the power of our mind, is that its potential is that we can accomplish what we wish to accomplish if we access that potential within ourselves, within our own mind. Because everything in the universe has a power to affect. Everything has a function and what it's capable of doing. We can look at, for example, fire. Its function is that it can burn. And anything that we look at has its effect and the way it affects other things. Our food has its power to affect. Our clothes have their, power to affect. We might not use those terms, but basically every single phenomena in the world has a power to affect in a way that it relates others. It has its own sort of potential or power. A country has its own power. People, each person has their own power. But what is unique is the power of the mind, how its potential is much greater than any other thing, because it actually has the power, the potential to accomplish what we're truly seeking. And so our problem is that we don't realize the power of our mind, and when we don't access that potential, and therefore we get stuck in the ways that we do. Masa?
Teni di Gimson de carere zena na sem korang la tefta u nurtup yo pa di Gimson carere zena sem dalana kyong ke chaching derore teni sem kertang la yundeng ke chaching kyang derore teni kyong ke chatena carere zena nga chuglor ke nam tok na rang tang jan la no pap shepi na dangzen chenbo yo pa tang nga chu challi gari dangzen yore rang soso devjin to nga chu challi gari dakchinzen yore jen yerwer dot browa ke dakchinzen rang ni khona dena dewa chik thobna dungar chigli tarsona samya ko lo to hajang hu chenbo yore nga zo tsaldi gari lo yore de ta wu lo tang de jen to teni ta lo chig tang de jen to control tang chatok la sok pi de nyumo ba mambo yore de la teni ne jignang tang semcher tang teni chig loneliness tang teni chig 나도 개경랑 룩당 대초 차 참마데 용구요래 나초 할리비 다 샘처만 볼라와 라속바 당상 그 둔들라 믹서 그때 용구도 봐 대초 샘코랑 그 초르나다 샘코랑 그 셸리제구나라 덴디지 대도 군지사와 뉴문 바탐실라 툭로고요 대양 나초 샘담 데도 거래 이제 좀 대초.
So when we consider then the reason why our mind is so powerful is because actually all of our problems that arise are related to our mind, but also all of the positive qualities and such are also related to our mind. And so we have this temporary experience of all of these sort of mental challenges that we have, which then result in suffering for ourselves and us causing suffering to others. And primarily then we have the challenges of being self-centrically focused. Our mind is so overly fixated on ourselves that the measure of grasping to ourselves goes beyond then the ability to have basic well-being. And the measure of cherishing and fixation of selfishness goes far beyond the capacity for well-being. In fact, it's so great that we are willing to give up the welfare of others so that we can get what we want, the pleasure or well-being and happiness that we seek and the suffering that we're trying to avoid. And the result of that is that then we're overwhelmed by all kinds of mental afflictions on a continuous basis. We have an enormous amount of desire and attachment and jealousy and all of these thoughts and emotions affecting our mind. And then we have all these mental states of fear, of anxiety, of loneliness, of overemphasis on individuality, and especially these days in this very kind of turbulent time, then we're just afflicted continuously. But when we look at what those are, those sensations and feelings, those are our mind. Those are our mental states. And so they are the mental afflictions that are present within our mind and very much determined by our mind itself. Also.
오야 데레티 데니 윤등 그 차텔라 삼모 타나네 나투 셈키 람신제나온다 셈키 닐프제나온다 데는 코랑 윤등 삼티메 잡이 더니찬당 코에나 가레제나 샴바당 녀제당 히럽당 당엔전당 데브진토 데니 집데 그람신chen 코랑 그람신 데리 셈키 람신 옛날에 깬 남바데도 탐지 그 드립니 원이가 두 셈기랑 집대 임바데 냠스뇨도 그요 말마도 나초 집대 셈나 메바 말에 그살 그 자고요 바데리 직 자와니니 말 셈코랑 그럼신 집대 임바 셈코랑 그럼신 맹게 팁제나온다 데니 머게 위럼신 마임바 셈코랑 둥을 그럼신 찬치 마임바 셈 나초 셈기랑신데 예니 데니 둥을 맹켄다 코소 데리게 옛날에 나츠 용후요바 동거만 보면 용후요바 뜻간이 쇼레제나 대간이 쇼레제나는 딥쇼탄테 셈코랑 람진란데 유드니 쇼와 마임바 when 갈로르 고한기 치 담모 인장 요마 책밤신 돈 남고 왕기 요마란도 완나신 나츠 ken감바 마보치 그 왕기 셈데 데니 켄와트 송니 데니 랑라 예니 요비 윤던 탐치도 줍 와치 튀니 문도 겨 요말 콘조 사본 그 쓰기 와글라 냐도 그래 좀 그 차대도 탐치 문도 겨 그래 더 로로 말이에요. 좀 탐치는 셈 기랑진나 요 말. 나종리스. 오 딥시나 나투 셈 달라네. 서르진도 셈 코랑 그 윤든 탐치 문도 줄을시비 탑당. 좀 탐치 때 세르시비 탑라. 탑제나 탑때 영 따바임바. 리피트바. 건니도 교바. 무부 춘이 동탐바. when nga tu hirap kar to ka yang na na yang ya yo pa deni nyam so lang na na nyong ji yung kai on dedi chi ka thap de la ten ni nga tu do pa na jin top go khyo res
While we have these circumstances, these mental afflictions or flaws, they are very much temporary or conditional. Alternately, we also have this incredible potential for positive qualities. In fact, the positive qualities are not conditional, they are innate to the mind. They are the mind's nature or the mind's natural state. And so our mind is essentially then an inconceivably vast or infinite scope of positive qualities, of the potential for loving kindness and compassion, wisdom, knowledge, meditative absorption, all of which, the more of these qualities are evident to us, the more sort of peace of mind we have. The nature of mind is actually peaceful. And so when we look at the nature of mind, it is positive and it has an infinite potential. However, due to temporary conditions and adverse circumstances, then sometimes we are not aware of, we're obscured from experiencing the nature of our mind, from experiencing the peace and happiness, the well-being that are actually mind's natural attributes. It isn't that there is no peace or happiness, nor is it that we need to newly produce those or find them elsewhere. It's just that due to temporary circumstances, we aren't experiencing those, but their potential already lies within us because they are the nature of our mind. Our mind's nature is not innately or originally negative. It is not the nature of suffering. Our mind's nature is actually its natural state is a freedom from suffering. Its natural state is of peace and well-being. So when we wonder why do we experience so much affliction and so much suffering, because we aren't experiencing the nature of our mind and of its innate positive qualities and potential. And so, as I mentioned earlier, like when we look at, well, what should, if we're in our pursuit then of well-being, then what should our mind engage in? And what should it disengage in? How do we work with our mind? But when we don't know that, then we don't access its potential. And then we're completely subject to conditions. And so in that same way, then the nature and of our mind, all of its inherent positive qualities are always present and always accessible, but we temporarily don't see them and don't experience them due to the conditions, kind of like water's natural translucence and clarity is not experienced when it's mixed with mud and dirt and it's stirred up. Then you can't see that natural attribute of water, which never went away, but temporarily due to the conditions of the mud, we can't see it. We don't experience it. And so when we're completely subject to conditions, then those circumstances obscure us from recognizing our timelessly present potential and the nature of mind. They create obstacles or impediments for us to experience what it actually is. And so all of those qualities may be present within each of us. We may all have that potential, but it's like a seed, or they're like dormant within us. They're there, but we aren't experiencing them. We're not seeing them. the flaws, all of the negative aspects are conditional. They're not mind's nature. And that is why we can find freedom from them. But the issue is that we have to have the methods that actually free the mind from them, to understand how the mind truly operates and to learn to work with methods that then actually bring out and increase and make evident our innate positive qualities while simultaneously eliminating the flaws, all of our issues and problems and so forth that we have in our mind. The key, though, is that those methods have to be ones that actually work, which means that those methods correspond with the way things are, the way our mind operates, and how to work with conditions. Those methods need to be based on logic and reasoning, correspond to the nature of reality. And so it's something that we need to study. We have to cultivate the knowledge that understands those factors through reason and logic, and then is able then to engage in the methods that will actually do this for us. And if then we do engage in such authentic and true methods, then we can actually attain what we're seeking.
Oya tere te tau tani tap te lojong ze ningi di tep kanala pshat yo pa te di tap te la nga so juk sa ke tap te ore di lojong di nala kari ore ze na ne nga so mchi na na kar chen bo ni ke ti kap dur kap lan ngi per te met mo wi tab la ni shina de ke ore nga so mche la bo sha ni jap na chik te kari re ze na nga so kar chen bo chik te nga so ki ni ta nga so khwa la tak chot ma song ko wa to ma kha kong ko wa to ki ni ta ti wa to mche kang kana ko lu tong ngak tong yit sambo ki yit sambo nol tong duglung las wa tham chit de la pen ni teni ton yo pam riu yo pa nya bo yo pa chi she tap te te teni search ko ta ta ni ma kha ko wa to ta ki ni ma kha ko wa te ta ni ba de nga so khwi ni ka na ta hali pa chi durkap karchin chila lep songarwa jimsan kaure zena tani makha kawarto duk sore mi sore mache dara yinna ta noran so noran bi ni kaptela mama bo halipi ten chiwi ni kamna center tana ta ti kapla kanga chembo ma bo yori ti kapla yang sendi tok de jibde chik ni thapa mazat chiwi ni kamna chiki ni kaptela yang jibde chik karip she go khodo that tea tablam to chatamati development kana yores khentu ni kya tab devo tanga mokowa mepa tanga de antani mixer ko religion ji ko person yin tang men koran zhe zhongta chi ge ji su yu yu tang med la so ba tamchela martu par chapar me par kunji tani de la viang na ne viang chok tang devjin to sosu semna la nyamse na nyamse len chok ba 어딘지 지금 드니냐면 디 탑람데 드니 샤디오레스 드니 다도 좀좀 좋았어요.
Okay, so then Rinpoche said, so the methods that is the specific that I've taught here in this book is for working with our mind in this way is what we call mind training or lojong. And the lojong is a complete series of techniques for working with our mind throughout the course of our entire experience. Our whole life is basically has like two kind of major sections to it, which is then while we are living during our life, and then at the time while we are dying. And the mind training gives us methods for both. And so during our life is from the time we're born until then the time where we begin the active process of dying. And the mind training gives us methods for working with our body, speech, and mind. How can we relate to things to change and transform our experience and gain greater capacity and power over our experience so that we can make it meaningful and bring about something truly beneficial. Essentially, all of that is bringing greater peace and well-being into our lives and the lives of those connected to us. And then we have then at the end of our life, at the time of dying, which is also another extremely important part of our life. And at that time, it can involve a lot of hardship and concern and worry and fear and so forth. And so if we have worked with methods and truly learned our mind and utilize these techniques during the course of our life, we found greater peace and well-being during the course of our life, then we can continue to do so during the time of dying as well, and find a real peace and well-being at the time of our death. And so then there are actually very specific methods in these teachings that teach us how to die with peace and well-being, how we can go about doing that, and specific methods for that. And so the mind training contains an enormous amount of techniques for working with and changing our mind in all kinds of circumstances, essentially then encompassing the course of how to live and how to die in a way that brings greater peace and well-being into our life. And these methods are ones that are not, they're not specific to a religion in that anyone could practice them. They're practical methods that any of us, whether we are a religious person of any spiritual approach or not, then without any differentiation, anyone could take up these methods and apply them through study and practice. And so that is the topic of the book, the methods for working with our mind. And so that kind of wraps up the talk from Rinpoche said. And so then if there are any questions now.
Hi, thank you both so much. This is absolutely fascinating. Please, audience, if you have any questions, type them into the Q&A box. Rachel and I will pose them for you. First off, though, there's a question here already from Amy. She asks, could you tell us about a challenging moment from your own life when your mind training made a big difference?
Teni tengin mixer ke te nga matse kong kanala nga tefta wu lojong gu shokla nroya te gimsen khini gimsen thoni ranin dik shokla teni song katu yinayo nima rerib jinto when nga tu rana sosu semnang ka kangar tanyoda nyumon pa kharnayo da yana shuru ko yurkin la teni nga chola shong songine jigna ta central la su ba gang yin chang da shir ke metse na la on dir mi kap zea main parne tu gimber te nima rerib jento jikten di na la ndrob jento jikten di na de nyam sum nyong jento yin na rang ke tefta to shir tang shet to pi was.
So that's actually kind of a hard question for me, Rinpoche said, because I learned mind training at a very young age. And essentially my entire life, I've always applied that in the face of all kinds of circumstances. It's basically my way of thinking as I'm relating to the world throughout each day, especially, of course, if I encounter some kind of hardship or difficult circumstances and disturbing emotions arise, or the external circumstances are really challenging and so forth, I simply respond with the training and working with the mind. And so I don't have like one kind of moment or a specific circumstance that I could detail, because it's kind of been my way of life from my very early training.
Teni chapar wachik tambo go
But
piki ka
I can say a little bit about when I first learned it.
mi pala te nga lo chutki
When I was 16, my father drowned and died in the river.
nga cho pu cheo
And there were 10 children in my family, and just my mother.
Teni ngaso
And
pe
it was
Father
an
Chino,
extreme.
chute on the
The
river te
river
ngaso
was
zurla.
also just next to our house.
Teni korang
And,
teni pe ngaso
and
gimber
so
ke
it was a place that we
chip
went
orang.
often, and the water
Pani.
that we used.
Ngaso pala chir la lip kri samyanda
and,
wo
you
sem
know,
harkyo
we,
te kabla.
you know, at the time we thought he
Ni
would
tedi samso.
he would get out or come back. I
Chino ni
remember,
yungre samro du
you know,
chino
that he
la
would, I thought he
patani
would like
sem
come out of the
tedi
water and come back.
pe
And
dunga
so,
chembo sho.
you know, there was an
Yenna
enormous
yang
amount of suffering in that loss.
Ti ni kaptela
But at that time,
ngala lojong
then
khanke
there
then
was
you
a
lama khachi
lama,
ke.
a few that came who had really good mind training
ngala lojong ke
teachings
thablam
themselves
khachi
and practice.
chapsha
And they
khachi
gave
tas
me some advice for working with my mind through that tragedy.
tela teni ngi mitsi
And
na
that was when it began. And then my entire life went in that direction without any kind of doubt. I knew for sure that this was the way.
tendi ku hukin chembo
And so
tela
it was
mitsi ke kapsha kwara
that was
Then
it
you
was
know
kind of
some
like
of the
a
teacher
determining time in my life how I would live my life really began, because at that time that was the kind of place it began with.
te teni zong te
And so
lam
from
sang da
then,
wo jingi sem no
you know,
tanda sam no na
Until then,
konsul hapsha ta ya ke
you know,
tela
when
teni
I think back
rong
upon
ke
the
sem no
advice
la
that they gave me
when na nga cho
at that
chi
time,
lam sang te pala tong so wi dungar tham chi
There
le
was
met
this-
so
there-
na
then it
Very
really
young
brought
boy,
great
which is
relief.
something.
There had been so much heaviness over the death of my father, and I remember that in beginning, just shifting my mind, just in those beginning pieces of advice, that there was just an enormous sense of relief and the weight that was lifted from then onwards.
yeah something like that.
We have another question that came in anonymously in my DMs to you, Paloma, asking if you could tell us a little bit more about the translation process for this book and what your work was like.
Yeah, it wasn't a written translation. It came from Rinpoche's own teachings. He was in Connecticut. He had done a 3-weekend series, and initially they transcribed it. And when I looked at the transcriptions, I thought, I don't speak English or don't speak full sentences. And so it was really about bringing Rinpoche's words into a book format. That was really the most challenging part, because it's so different from oral teachings. And so it took a lot of work, and I had many different editors at different times that I worked with over at each stage. I worked with different people, and they helped me refine it until we really got to his words. And so that was it was a big exploration for me. It took us 13 or 14 years with all the other projects and activities and Rinpoche's ongoing teachings. But I'm really excited about the book. It's a great resource. It's not like any other mind training books that's out there. We researched a lot before deciding to publish it, to seek to publish it. It's a practice focused primarily. And it was the culmination. Then, you know, from a young age, from the time of 16 onwards, then his primary heart teachings were always the mind trainings. And so when and his practice, that was his main practice. And so then those were the teachings that he really shared with us and really touched many of our hearts. And so when Rinpoche said I came to America for 20 years, that was the primary emphasis of what I taught. And I was traveling around about 10 months out of the year and teaching. And during that time, the majority of those teachings were mind training. And because I saw, Rinpoche said that it directly benefited people, that there were techniques that people could immediately apply and experience the benefits of. So, for example, here I'm in Connecticut tonight, and that's then, you know, I taught the mind training here extensively. And actually, so last night I had a talk, and there were, with a bookstore, there were about 150 people that came. And they all bought a book. It was very sweet. But why
콘수 로브종 제메
because
하고 그거를
they
셔셔.
understood a little bit about mind training and its value.
어디라고 그래서
And so I
판톡
think
배체
it's
모두
of
삼배요.
enormous value and
되니
you
얼마나 판톡 비례와
feel like it's
참고지 요새
not
자잖아.
just benefited me in my life enormously, but I really want to share that and have it benefit others. That's it.
Thank you so much. The next question is one of my own, Rinpoche, which is, besides buying the book, what do you recommend is the best way for someone to start the process of lojong, work on this?
I'm sorry, I missed the beginning part of that.
Well, I was just saying, besides buying the book,
Buying the book.
what do you recommend is the best place to start and the best step to start with?
Yep. Nhớ nằm ạ, nhớ rồi yên là lâu trong cái địa chỉ check DJ là sao thép năng là cái nhóm lên đều yên là làm sao lâu trong program for today.
야 나추
So,
가리레제나
The
되니 가리레제나는 대 오래래 대 포랑나 냠스
the
렌소리
book
뭐래.
itself actually has very clear practice
When the
instructions
numbers
at the
check
end of
schedule,
each section. So it'll give a
그럼 대 냠스
section,
렌소 샤죠.
and how what
로종
the
답시
meaning
exercise
of something, and then how do you apply that to your, how do you exercise your mind? How do you apply that? And then there's like a practice. It tells you how to apply that, and so it actually gives you a lot of methods.
로종 프로그램.
But the other thing is that we are about to release an online mind training program, and it takes every single point. There are 76 different practices in total, and it presents them one at a time, and it's all practice oriented. So if someone wanted to really go into it in depth, then we provide an actual program that takes you through that step by step.
Well, Paloma, Rinpoche, thank you both so much for being here this evening and presenting the power of mind. You can order it at northshire.com. We'll put the link in the chat. And thank you both. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you hosting us this evening.
Thank you. Take care, everyone, and we'll see you at another Northshire Presents event soon. Take care, everyone, and good evening.
Good evening.